Bloodbound, Part 5. At first I was furious at Traum for what he had said. No, first I didn't believe him. Then I was furious. But it made sense. That was the part that hurt the most. It was something I'd guessed, but never dared voice. It had been in the way Mother had spoken of Father. Fondly, affectionately, but not love, not heartbroken. Why would someone marry someone they didn't love? Because they couldn't have the one they did. Because they cared enough about the other person not to want to hurt them. But it was enough. That was when I knew I couldn't tell Forrest I loved him. Because he wouldn't want to hurt me. He'd say something we'd both regret, and I'd accept it, because it was enough. Which left me only one option. Traum?
You're not going to throw another teacup at me, are you?
You make a terrible impression of an evil sorcerer.
I'll work on it.
I want to see the first contract.
You're not going to tell him?
I don't want either of us to have to say it's enough.
But you don't know without asking.
I know. This says I have the right to see the first contract.
You might not like what you see.
You do keep saying things like that.
Walk towards the mirror. Welcome to my abode, Anana.
You're odd sometimes.
I was told once I was charming.
Once in how many centuries? You need to work on that.
I thought I was supposed to work on making an impression as an evil sorcerer.
So evil sorcerers can't be charming?
Not when they're being evil.
Only on the off hours, huh? Is that now?
Not when you've come to see the scroll. This way, please.
What is all this?
Business.
You sell vases?
Antiques.
Because that's such an obvious side job for an immortal sorcerer. I feel like I'm stuck in a cliché.
It started by me selling things I'd collected and no longer needed. Some of it belonged to your ancestors before Ernestina, when they stayed with me. I had no need of them once they
passed on. And you, of course, kept living. That's why you stopped keeping them near you, isn't it?
I was always left alone in the end. It grew too difficult.
Weren't you lonely?
I preferred the loneliness.
Where's the scroll? This can't be natural.
In a sense, no. The cavern was natural, but it was smaller, and I have altered it over time to suit my needs.
Thought witches used cauldrons, not sorcerers.
I spent some time training under a witch. I find it really useful. Besides, I've never held with gender stereotypes.
Somehow, I guessed that about you. How long have you lived here?
Is it 100 years now? No, closer to 200, for the cavern, anyway. The building above has changed many times.
Do you like it here?
I suppose I do. More than my homeland, I never really thought about it.
Where's the scroll?
You certainly have a one-track mind.
I prefer to call it goal-oriented. It sounds more impressive.
Nor carries any negative connotations?
Exactly. Don't do anything halfway, do you?
Anything worth doing? Besides, that contract changed my life.
Changed your life?
I'll explain after you look at the scroll if you wish to hear it.
Why not now?
Anana, look at the scroll.
I, the undersigned, in exchange for the spell of entrancement, promise he who holds the scroll the ownership of one of my flesh and blood, a child born of me, and following them, one of their line and onwards, until his passing from this world. Once signed, the contract cannot be revoked, save by the dispelling of the paid for enchantment. Anana.
I did warn you.
Mother's seen all of this. She stood here once.
Like you, she wasn't satisfied with knowing half the tale. She needed to see, to touch, to understand.
Why? Why did she name me after...
We weren't seeing each other then, remember? That part of the story Nalani took with her to her grave.
Tell me about her, the first Anana.
Anana was a woman of passion. She did nothing by halves, her nature was in absolutes. She could be the kindest of friends and the fiercest of enemies. And she remains the most generous and the most ruthless woman I've ever known.
It all began with unrequited love.
As your family legend tells it, yes, but I knew her before she fell in love with him.
No, not hers. Yours. You loved her.
She was the only one in the village who didn't fear me. We were of age, and the adults feared my magic, feared me, but Anana never did. She never treated me like I was different. How could I not love her?
But she couldn't accept enough.
No halves.
And she asked you to cast the spell? Didn't she know? She did know. That's why she asked you. She knew you wouldn't refuse.
When my tutor passed and I left the village, I gave her that necklace. Say my name and I would come to her if she needed anything. Anything in my power to grant.
The necklace was never the love spell. It was a symbol of your love for her.
She understood. Sometimes she'd call me just to talk. To her I was the dearest of friends, but never more. And then, one day, she fell in love.
But he didn't love her.
I fear my crime was even greater than that. He loved another, and her him.
And she still asked? You still spelled?
The most ruthless woman I have ever known. She cared not for the pain it would cause the other woman, only for her own joy, and I cared only for her happiness, and perhaps my own. A child of hers to raise as my own, as it might have been if she'd chosen me instead.
To raise? But the scroll says to own.
Neither of us had raised a child. We should have worded it differently, but at the time it seemed adequate. It wasn't until I'd raised Ryza to adulthood that I came to realise what I'd done and sought a way to undo it.
True love.
She loved him and he her. How could she marry him and belong to me? Technically she could, but at that point I wanted Ryza to be happy, to be free. So I brought us together, Ryza, Anana and I, and we altered the terms of the first contract. But that was all we could do, alter it. The first could not be undone save by ending the love spell, and Anana would never agree to that. I think Ryza hated her for it. I think she truly hated her.
So Ryza was freed, but her children...
were free till her death. Some were already in love, and some would find it after. 7 children. I guess in the end, not everyone could be so lucky. Sona, he had children with a few of his lovers, but he never knew love as his mother and siblings did.
But you didn't raise him. Any of them.
Ryza was alive.
But her contract was void.
I was permitted to get away with it that time. Later, I was not allowed such leeway.
Allowed? Permitted? It was your contract.
It became my punishment.
For what?
He loved another, remember? And when he betrayed her for Anana, it destroyed her. She took her own life.
You couldn't have known she'd do that, Traum.
I knew I was destroying a love for her.
From what I've read in my history books, you aren't the only one guilty of that. You just happened to use magic.
And she just happened to be the blessed of a goddess. Life's funny that way.
A goddess?
Ever heard of them? Omnipotent beings with unfathomable powers and too much time on their hands.
I've read it through mythologies.
There's nothing mythological about them.
Like evil sorcerers and familiars?
Just have to know where to look.
Antique dealers, apparently.
Ever heard be careful what you wish for?
I read a few fairy tales too.
I believe this one is more fitting for Aesop's tales. I wish to raise Anana's children to be part of her grandchildren's lives. I got that and more. More than any mortal could ever want.
But you aren't. If you were immortal, why does the scroll mention the time of your passing?
Immortality was her curse. The contract became my punishment. A part of Anana's family, but never truly a part of it. I tried to negate a few times, but the goddess would not allow it.
It's been centuries. I think you've been punished enough. Isn't she over it yet?
Immortals have long memories.
But there has to be a way to end it. Even in Aesop's tales, there's always a solution.
She gave me the same chance I arranged for Anana's line. Love.
No offense, but isn't that what got you into this mess?
Harsh, but honest. You forget the conditions. Love is what entraps us. Only by being loved in return are we freed.
Do you have ink? Or do I sign this in blood? I thought these went out with the Victorian age.
Those are Edwardian, actually. And it works better on scrolls than modern pens.
So why do you still use scrolls?
They last longer, actually. Look nicer, too. Allow me to escort you home, Anana.
I don't feel any different.
Should you?
I don't know. I think I should, but I don't. What happens now?
Walk towards the mirror. It will take you home.
Will I see you again?
There's no need for further contact now the scroll is signed.
Will you still come if I call you?
Of course.
Then I'll see you again.
I'll be waiting.